like to thank Mark Cripps from the Insurance Bureau of Canada for coming on to the podcast today. And he's going to clear up my auto insurance claim right here. No, I'm just kidding, folks. I'm kidding. We had him on because I've been wanting to do this episode for a while, folks, because I think this is an issue that keeps popping up on our episodes. If you're a longtime listener, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I finally want to get somebody who knows what they're talking about, not just anecdotally, but somebody we can actually ask the real questions on. And that's the effects that climate change is going to have on the 905 in the next, not in the distant future, but kind of in the near future, and steps that we need to start really taking a gamble or start taking steps right now to fix. So Mark, thanks for coming on and taking time from your busy schedule to join us. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's stop beating around the bush. How serious is the insurance industry looking at the issue of climate change, not just in 905, but let's say the entire country?
Well, I mean, it's not new to us. I mean, in fact, the insurance industry, not just in Canada, but globally, has been leading the sort of charge, the advocacy around the need to for countries and to look at climate change as a risk, not down the road, but that's happening right now. And all you need to do is look at Canada, for example, like 10, 15 years ago, the average insured loss costs in from natural disasters, and we're talking insured loss here, not the uninsured loss, averaged about $450 million a year. Now, last year it was 3.1 billion alone. On average, we're in the $2.5 billion a year zone, and that's year. If you look back to 2018, every year has been in the $2 billion range. So, we've been warning governments. We've been advocating that they take this seriously, and part of the problem is that, and I'm not, this isn't a criticism, but emissions, that gets all the headlines. Everybody's focused on reducing emissions, but the problem is that climate change is already here, and we're seeing it. So we need to shift our focus into defense. And how are we going to protect ourselves? How are we going to adapt to the new normal that we're getting more severe weather, and it's happening more frequently, and the cost in a society like ours that has that's fairly well off and has built itself up, and people have built a lot of equity in their homes, that this is a big deal when it comes to the insured losses. So we're right now, and we've been banging down the doors of the federal government for 3-4 years on the need for a national flood insurance program. England has it. Other G7 countries already have a program like this, and this sort of speaks to what you're talking about. The reality is, in Canada, is that the risk of flood, for example, is so high in certain areas that you can't even get insurance, so you can't even protect your home, because the impacts of climate change have, made, properties that are abutting waterways or along riverbeds and stuff that are now routinely flooding can't even buy insurance. So how do we protect those people? How do we create a system where at least they can buy some financial resilience? Like, it's not like we can just up and make all these people move. Right. So that's kind of the alarm bells have been ringing for a long time. But government moves really slow. And I think, for me, what I've come to understand, and maybe this is a cynical take, but I don't trust politicians to really make them to deal with climate change anymore. I think capital markets are the ones that are going to force the change. Insurance is capital. And when people start to see this impact their pocketbook, their wallet, i.e., hey, my property insurance went up $300, $400, $500. Why is that? Mm-hmm. Insurance is pricing risk. This isn't a huge profit game, right? The insurance industry works on very small margins. Where they make their money is they take the capital, they invest it into the bond market, and then they're able to make, more capital. But, this isn't a huge, like, people have the perception that, insurance companies are, walking around with bags of money. It's risk. It's all done by actuaries. This is science. Like, this is mathematics and
Now,
science.
now when you're talking, you dropped the, I missed the number, but like we're talking the billions with a B, uh,
Yep.
in payouts for insured claims. This is people like these are claims that people said, nope, this is in my policy. This is what I've been paying for. Can you kind of just for clarity's sake, what's the difference between an insurable claim and an or insured loss and an uninsured loss? Just so we're all
Yeah, sure.
clear on
Yeah.
what exactly we're
Well,
talking about here.
Well, property insurance is not mandatory, right? You do not have to purchase property insurance. In Canada, we have developed a culture of, the government will look after me through these disaster financial assistance programs, which have been created both at the provincial and federal levels. So, if you look at the BC floods, it's a perfect example. We're talking, 20, 30 billion dollars in total loss. I mean, that number could even go higher. Of that total, like 800 million was insured. So think about
Wow.
that, right? So now I'm including public infrastructure in that number, all that stuff, but people have kind of like, this is kind of the problem. We haven't created this sort of culture of education. Like, people buy an insurance historically, people bought an insurance policy as like, nothing's ever going to happen to me, but I'll buy it just in case. Today, people should think about buying an insurance policy on the premise that something very well could happen to
Mhm.
you, right? With climate change and the new risks of flooding and severe weather. And, we'll look at the Derico storm that went through Ontario last May. That's $1 billion in damage alone. Where did that come from? What's
Well,
going on?
I mean,
Like,
I live in Burlington, and I mean, kind of, I know we're talking about Canada's wide, but to bring it back to the 905 uh, region, like in Burlington, we had massive flooding from a creek overflow that flooded one of the like a Appleby line, which if you're not from Burlington listeners, it's a major roadway that like a lot of businesses and people live and work on. And there was massive flooding. There was massive damage to people's homes. And it came down to, I mean, ultimately came down to, I believe the end result was just climate change. The storm surge, banks overflowed due to spring. I think it was like a spring or spring thaw. It just that's what happened. And the people are like, well, I don't have flood insurance because I lived in the dry part of town. um, and I guess that's kind of the reason why I want to have this conversation is that people, you're right. People think of emissions, they're thinking of the oil sands, which is a whole other issue.
yeah,
But it's just, oh, we're going to do electric cars. That's going to save us all. And what I guess this kind of brings my next question is that, you know, we kind of see like in private business, the public relations campaigns that they undertake to advocate like their conservation work and how they're producing products or services more sustainably and whatnot. And it's meant to make them look good, which might be
yep.
warranted. Not going to go into that. But you guys at the IBC and the insurance companies in Canada, you're taking a more proactive approach, and your tone is very different than, say, like GM or a Ford saying, "Hey, we're coming up with this brand new electric vehicle. And we're going this direction. That's great, all wonderful." But you guys are taking a more it's definitely a more serious tone. You guys don't come in with all the smile like, "Hey, we've got this great new product and we're doing this." It's like, guys, it's getting serious. Like, sit down. Let's get to work. And just would you say that you're taking this issue more seriously than other industries are?
I think it's, we're an industry based on risk, right? We evaluate risk, we price risk, we provide products to people to protect them, to provide financial resilience. So, we can continue, the problem is that, like, we can continue to do that, but we're going to hit the wall where we can no longer price the risk affordably. And this is why we're sounding the alarm bells. Like, for instance, like flood insurance has only actually been available since 2005, right? There was no flood insurance before that because, it just wasn't, fire, people used to say, fire, insurance was all about fire. Well, flood is the new fire. And it's the biggest risk to homes and properties in Canada. If you look at, the fact that Canada's warming at a faster pace than most of the world, we are going to face some serious, serious issues, especially around the coastal areas of erosion, of overland flood. So the insurance industry came together. It happened in the wake of the Calgary floods. If you remember the Calgary floods,
Yep.
and there was this demand, like, why isn't there insurance for this? So, the insurance companies came together, they priced the product, and now it's available. But this is the key point. It's optional. So you need to have that conversation when you're buying your insurance policy and considering your risks, right? Here's another big conundrum. How do you actually assess your risk, right? What information can you as the public get? What portal can you go to where you can say, hey, my neighborhood is in a low-lying area. So if there's a massive microburst from the sky, like Burlington had that big flood there many years ago, that all happened because of a microburst. So people often think of flood coming from bodies of water, but now flooding's coming from above, and this is the biggest risk. And we've built in these low lying, historically, prior to proper planning, some communities were built in low lying areas. So, but say you live there, like, unless your broker saying to you, look, like, you're living in a low lying area, you should probably consider flood insurance. But we have a bit of a culture of, like, insurance is like price over policy, right? And I think a lot of people, and I get it. Like, I mean, there's so many pressures on the pocketbook, and insurance is a big expense for families. And sometimes you gotta weigh what you can afford and what you can't afford, and that's why having this national flood insurance program, which the private sector would run on the behest of the government, right? So we have the experience and the infrastructure to run it, but the government would backstop. So it's just kind of like, so now we can kind of go to some of these areas where the price of the product is cost prohibitive, and say, look, there is a public-private option, and I think that's kind of where we need to get. We're really hopeful. I don't know that the federal government, Bill Blair made a commitment to it last February in BC when he was touring the flooded areas, and said, we need this national flood insurance program. So we're hopeful we'll see it in the budget this month, but I don't know. I mean,
We'll wait and see. You know, you're talking about how you're kind of taking on the leadership role in terms, not in terms of the business and economic side of this debate. Because going back to your previous statement about how you kind of lost faith in government to fix this problem, is now up to the private sector somewhat to step up. And I'm wondering, maybe could you comment a bit on just, like, has the IBC or the companies that you support kind of lit a fire underneath private industry's butt to say, like, okay, forget the public relations campaigns, forget the smiles and everything. If this stuff goes south, if that you built that factory on a spot that chances are it's probably next to a river. That's just the reality. Like, if flooding happens, like, this is going to cost you so many hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars in loss of productivity, paid out wages, all that stuff. Are you like, what's the reaction from the private industry, private business, when you're coming in and saying, this is the cost, guys, if you don't shape up now, we're not going to be able to cover your losses on these things?
yeah, I mean, I think insurance is the great leveler in terms of this decision, in terms of the decision making process, especially when it comes to planning. So, for example, in today, if a developer bought a piece of land in a known floodplain, right? There are two backstops that are going to prevent that property from ever being developed. Number one is the bank is not going to finance it. The bank is going to do its own risk assessment of the land. They're going to see that it's a floodplain, and they're going to say, why would we finance this? Anybody with any wits about them is not going to buy a house in a known floodplain. The second thing is that, the insurers will send signals on the pricing of a product, and they will say, okay, so all your new homeowners that you're proposing to build these homes for are going to pay massive amounts for insurance. And that will be a deterrent too. I mean, any smart person when they're buying a home, I hope would one of the things that they should consider is, what is it going to cost me for insurance? Like, that should be one of the considerations. And I think even mortgage lenders would also be like, I'm not lending you money to buy a house in a floodplain where you're gonna have to pay $10,000 a year for insurance or more, right?
Mhm.
So we are kind of like, we are a little bit of a sober kind of like, our industry is very sobering when it comes to, the consumer decisions, planning decisions. And so when you talk about a factory like that, I mean, it would even be more so. I mean, the amount of capital that would have to be put up to build a new factory. And if it was like built in a known floodplain where there was absolutely no, remediation or any kind of effort to, it just wouldn't get the financing, it wouldn't get the capital. And, so that is a bit of a bit, that's why I really love this industry. As much as people hate insurance, we are a force for good, whether people, you know, want to agree. I mean, it's a grudge purchase, right?
I,
I mean,
I only have half an hour, Mark, so I can't defend you for being a force for good. And right now, I can already hear the emails being sent in, uh, criticizing. But on the note though of kind of shifting our perspectives on this file,
yeah,
I think for a lot of people, like the average Joe who might be listening right now, they're listening in their car or they're listening at their home to this podcast, and they're thinking, yeah, climate change is important, but it's so big, right? It's a global
yep,
issue. It's a global matter. I'm just Joe Smith sitting in my lazy boy, listening to the podcast, reading the paper. What can I do about it? It's too big. The big wigs have to take care of it. But from what you're telling me is that those effects are going to start coming closer and closer to home before we know it. And I'm wondering, to that person who's listening in their car and that person who's listening at home to this podcast right now, you have their ear. What might people in the 9 to 5 expect to see change from the insurance industry in terms of their own policies or new policies that they might have to purchase over time? Should we just keep going the route that we're going right now?
yeah. I mean, I would say a few things like, I would definitely recommend that people have an honest conversation with their broker or their insurance representative, and just get the best advice about their property and ways to protect it. I mean, the value of our homes is the most important asset we have.
Mhm.
You want to protect it. And brokers can be a really good link to sort of like connecting you to, look, like, sewer backup, sewer backup and overland flood are two completely different products. A lot of people get flooded. Burlington was a good example. A lot of people had sewer backup, but they didn't have overland flood insurance. It doesn't matter when the water enters your home from below.
Mhm.
It's not the same as when the water enters your home from the windows or through
Right.
the door. So that's really important conversation to have. Assess your risk, see if you can take steps to mitigate your risk. A lot of people live in older homes, for example, wouldn't have backflow water valves installed. That's a really important tool to have. We have old neighborhoods with old municipal infrastructure, non-separated sewers. You're getting these massive amounts of rain. The water has nowhere to go, so it starts going back up through the
Mhm.
pipes, right? So, other than that, I mean, wind is covered. under most standard home insurance policies, so tornado, fire, hail for the most part, those are the things that are already covered. It's really the water. The water is the area where you really want to have a conversation with your broker. And now, if you look at the broader picture globally, and this is where I think people need to understand that this will come home to roost. It already is in a way. So, insurers rely on insurance as well. Insurers buy what's called reinsurance, right? So they buy reinsurance in the capital markets to help. It allows them to basically cover more risk. The reinsurers came in this year. January is the renewal period with massive increases, up to 30% in the. So, you know, while it didn't hit Canada as hard as it hit the U.S. because the U.S. They had the two massive hurricanes last year, massive losses. Um, you know, that's going to filter through into your property insurance policy. So people are likely going to see maybe. I mean, I hate to predict, but I mean, you know, insurers have to pass those costs off because now they're paying more to buy reinsurance. If we don't address the issues and speak with our elected representatives and demand that we take adaptation seriously, that we don't use this as a political game anymore. It really is just. This is why I don't have any hope sometimes, Joel, because it's like climate change isn't a game,
Mhm.
right? And no matter what you think, even if you deny it, okay, even if you think it's fake, the fact is you're still at risk. Something's happening, right? So
Right.
how do you protect yourself? Like that's the main thing. And I think people should really look at their insurance policy in a different light, their home insurance policy in that instead of thinking that it'll never happen to me, but I need to buy it, they should look at it as, you know what? It's happening everywhere and I need to make sure I'm protected.
On that note, uh, I know you've said repeatedly you've lost faith in the in the politicians to solve this, but there are people listening right now who are saying, "No, we can't let them off the hook that easily." I'm going to, what does the industry or what's the industry looking at uh, that they think should be done to mitigate the effects of climate change from their perspective? That they, either infrastructure bills or policy bills or just cap and trade carbon price, whatever the thing is. What is it that the industry looks for? I guess now that we have budgets coming up, what are you guys looking for to say, okay, that helps us provide the services that we're promising to provide to our customers?
Yeah, there's a lot of facets of that. Like I said earlier, like our focus is on adaptation. Our focus is on it's here now. We need to deal with it. So, FCM did Federation of Canadian Municipalities did a study a couple years ago where they estimated that, in order to adapt to the impacts of climate change, they needed like an annual investment of like $5.1 billion. That's a lot of cash.
Five
And
point one billion with a B.
$1 billion every
Wow,
year.
wow.
So, is that going to happen? To current federal government's credit, they have been stepping up investments in adaptation through the disaster mitigation fund and things like that. Um,
Is this you're talking about the like that $5.1 billion with the FCM are talking about? I want to kind of touch on that. That number just didn't spring up yesterday. That wasn't just a number that they pulled
no,
out of their hats and said, "Hey, that's a nice number." Like for decades, and this is not a conservative or liberal thing. This is for
exactly.
decades. And I'm even going to throw in the NDP because they were probably in power in the early 90s underneath Bob Rae, so they got to share this as well. We just did not invest in the infrastructure. If we're like, we're talking like a lot of our problems, I think, are coming down to sewers, hydro networks and whatnot are just grossly out of date. This is because nobody wanted to spend it, right? Everybody wants to spend money on the shiny new community center
Yeah.
or the shiny new sports arena in
Yep.
downtown, wherever. Um, is that just what it is? Like is it a case of just the bill has finally come due for us for decades, a generation of just putting it off because we want the shiny new toy, so to speak, at the municipal or provincial, federal spending level?
Yeah, I mean, politicians are focused on getting reelected,
Mhm,
and that seems to be the climate that we live in these days, where from the moment you're elected to power, your focus is on how do I get reelected 4 years from now or three, whatever it is, right? And often that doing the hard work, making the tough decisions, kind of like saying let the chips fall where they may, but that we really need to make some really difficult decisions. There's not many politicians that do that
mhm,
anymore, and there's not enough of them to create a critical mass that can move the dial. So yeah, we're playing massive catch up. Um, will we ever catch up? Probably not. So this is why governments also need to consider things like, and this is this, no, this will never be popular, but strategic retreat. Strategic retreat from areas that are prone to flooding, to that are high risk for flooding every 5 years. We can't continue to have this never ending cycle of taxpayers footing the bill for people to live on the river that floods every year. It just doesn't make any sense. And again, it's a tough political decision. But some provinces are starting to do that. For example, Quebec, New Brunswick, they have, through their disaster programs right now, their disaster relief programs, you get one shot. If you don't move, they'll buy you out after you're flooded. If you don't move, you're no longer covered from any other flood. So no matter what happens, you will receive zero coverage, zero compensation. Those are the kinds of really bold decisions that need to be made, because if you look at the Atlantic coast, there's going to be there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be, they're going to lose their homes. They're going to be forced to move.
well,
This is the big. These are the tough decisions that we have to kind of like
mhm.
compensate for the fact that we didn't adapt.
Well, I mean, I you mentioned the East Coast, and it's a personal note for myself. I was born on the East Coast. I have family that live there. I vacation on Prince Edward Island every summer, and this summer it was a heartbreaking one because we went and visited PEI. We got to enjoy the beaches, beautiful sunny days at Brackley Beach, enjoying our national park, and wonderful vacation with my family. Packed up, went home as we did, and then the next week, the hurricane hit, and we're in touch with my folks who were still down there, and they were just like, it felt like Wizard of Oz, like the cottage that we have there. They felt it was like my dad was saying that he was in the bedroom, in my bedroom. They decided to sleep in our bedroom. He said it felt like I was on a flatbed truck going down a bumpy country road, an unpaved country road, and I was just sitting on a flatbed, in the flatbed of a truck, and I was just bouncing up and down, and that's just from the wind. P- but more shocking, and this is a roundabout way of bringing it up, is we had taken pictures of the dunes at Brackley Beach, and we had taken pictures of my family standing there, and then the National Park Service was showing pictures of the day after the storm. And I kid you not, I don't know if you saw the pictures, but it was like 100 meters were
Yep.
gone,
Yep.
obliterated. And I was just, I was showing these pictures with my family. I'm like, oh my God. And the only thing I think of was like, this is climate change. This is the effects of climate change, that they're
Yep.
able to obliterate or change the landscape in that manner. And so, and that, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to have you guys on, because I know you guys are crunching the numbers on what that, like, what the cost is, that the homes that are affected, down power lines and all that stuff, the infrastructure damage, and whatnot. And
Yeah. The other problem, Joel, is that we're also facing a situation where you know like Hurricane Fiona is a good example. You have a massive amount of claims
Mhm,
resulting from that storm,
mhm,
and yet you're trying to deal with them in a time where there is supply chain shortages, there's a shortage of labor, um, you know, and so there's material shortages. So you're trying to make people whole, who are insured, and yet you cannot find the labor or the materials to do it in a, insurance company's goal is to get you set up straight as quickly as they possible. They want to get the claim done and move on, right? Now you're having these claims being delayed, and all these pressures of inflation and supply chain, it's all adding in to create this really perfect storm of more pressure on the system, potentially higher costs. Who knows, right? But that all factors in, like, and that's kind of like it's, we're dealing with this every year. Like now, it's not like it's a one-shot deal. Like there were multiple storms across Canada last year. It touched every single region of the country. The $3.1 billion in insured losses impacted every region of the country. So, you can't just say, oh, it's an Alberta problem, or it's
Right.
an East Coast problem. Ontario was the single largest loss event last year. The Derico storm that went through in May was the single largest loss event from last year, even bigger than Fiona. So, like, you can't hide your head in the sand and think that it's not. And again, it's about protecting yourself, right? Like, your home is your biggest asset.
Mhm.
Like, what more would you want to protect than that? And and at a time when we have the heightened risk, and it's not going to get any better, like, you really need to make sure that, like, you had to have those honest conversations about, you know, to make sure you're going to get out of this if you ever or have the unfortunate experience, that at least you can start over and rebuild.
Uh, I would be remiss if I didn't throw this last question at you. I mentioned it before we came on the air, but a couple episodes ago, take a note, listeners, go back in the catalog, check this episode out. But we had on Michael Twigg from the Smart Prosperity Institute, and he wrote a report that was co-signed by the IBC
Yep.
called "Investing in the Greenbelt." Or you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, I was fascinated by it. I thought the document was just like a really inventive way to relook at this issue or how to address this issue um, going forward. Could you just comment a bit about that? Like, you kind of give us a bit of your input, or not you specifically, but the IBC's input into that report, and just kind of your perspective on it.
Sorry, Joel, I missed a little bit of the beginning there. Was this on the land? This was on the. I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the investing in the greenbelt report that
Yeah.
you and the Prosperity Institute co-signed.
Yeah.
And I'm just
Okay.
wondering, just give us your perspective on it from the IBC point of view.
So IBC has also been, um, for many years, suggesting that there are, and insurers, on behalf of insurers, that there are alternative models to to build capital to protect risk. That includes green bonds. There is also uh, pen, pen, oh, what is it called? Parametric insurance. Sorry. So green bonds, parametric insurance. So, for example, like, I can give you an example on in the Quinta Rios coast of Mexico. They have purchased, Swiss Re is an insurer. They created an insurance product. It's innovative. This is what I love about insurers, that they are constantly innovating, trying to find new models. So they created an insurance product to protect the the tourism area of Mexico from so say a hurricane or something blew out the reef, and the waters came in and flooded the area. They created this parametric insurance product, which basically allows people to pull the capital out of their own kind of creation, right? It's their own capital. They create it, and then they can pull it out to recover faster. They have to pay premiums into it, right? They have to pay into it, but it's their own kind of capital fund. Same thing with green bonds. You're buying a bond, and you're basically saying that the value of that bond kind of increases by the fact that you have to take steps to mitigate your risk, right? So this is really important, where it could be applied in places like Windsor. Like, it's a good example where couple years ago, Windsor flooded twice in 3 years, and I mean, there were massive floods. Part of the problem is that the area Windsor was built, that part of Windsor was built in the floodplain. Many, many, many years ago, before we had better land use planning standards. And you have a massive swath of southwestern Ontario that is agriculture, and the water is, the water flows downhill, right? So, these are kinds of like ways you can take the steps as a municipality, or whatever group that joins in on this bond, to undertake and finance your own adaptation measures. So it's kind of like you're not relying on the government. You can work with the capital market to kind of finance some adaptation measures, and then the promise is that at the end of the day, as you accomplish these projects, you bring down the overall insurance rate for your property owners, which is just a great concept. We really need to. Again, it goes back to my earlier comment about, are we going to expect politicians to do this for us, or are we going to have to do it ourselves, right? Like, honestly, like, I feel like these are kinds of opportunities for people to take matters into their own hand wherever they live. So if instead of relying on the government to fix the big problem,
Right.
you take the opportunity to work with capital to fix your problem locally to protect your own residents.
Well, it's definitely something it's something that kind of, when I first heard about it, it kind of ringed a lot of bells in my head, mostly because I'm thinking in the 905, there's 4.5 million of us, all crammed in together, basically,
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Hamilton to Durham to Oshawa. We're here, people. We're stuck close to each other. We're not going anywhere. This is where we are. And a lot of us, I mean, if you look at the maps, a lot of us are on creeks. You have the in Toronto, the Humber River. You've got the Credit in Mississauga, and Hamilton has tons of waterfalls and
yeah. Red
waterways,
Hill.
Red Hill and all that. So the idea of, it's one of these things that we don't think about it, but I guess what I'm hoping with this episode is people will start to think about it and start to have that mind shift of, I can't keep going. Again, the point of climate change thing is we cannot keep going about doing things the way we've been doing it for the last 100 years. We need to rethink all of it, not just industry, not just our consumer lifestyle habits,
Yep.
but evidently protecting the things that are most important to us, such as where we live.
What could really help with that, and this is, I feel like, we have it in an inherited problem, right? We have development that's been undertaken over the last 80 years, and even more like frequently over the last 40, that never focused on climate change, that never focused on flood, that was car sector, get here, lots of roads. We've created a massive swath of concrete. And when the water comes down, it has nowhere to go. So it ends up in the few waterways that we have left, which then flood their banks, which then cause all kinds of problems, or it ends up in the municipal sewer system, where it causes all kinds of problems, flushing out of sewer into the lakes, water quality issues, all those kinds of things, right? So, how do we, we need to adapt. We need to find ways to adapt the current infrastructure we have. But one of the most important things we can do, I think, and I would like to see the development community buy into this, is that we need to build better. So when we build new communities, we build them to prepare them for flooding. There are lots, there's already, the codes are already done. There's lots of, every home gets built with a backwater flow valve. Every home, every home gets built with hurricane straps, so roofs don't fly off like they did in the Barrie tornado. It's the developers need to come to the table here and say, we need to build better homes that are resistant to flooding, that are resistant to heavy winds, to protect people's assets. They have a role to play. Unfortunately, the current kind of attitude is, we just build whatever the code is. Whatever the code
Right.
is, that's all we do. We're never going to go above and beyond the code. So, is that the government now forcing or not forcing? Because I don't look at it as forcing anybody to do anything. It's like, hey guys, we need to adapt. We need to have better building codes, building
Well,
standards,
at
how we plan and develop communities. Here they are. All new homes have to be built that way.
at one point, homes were not built with firewalls. You know,
Yeah,
I live in a townhouse in the middle unit. I've got firewalls built on both sides of me.
right.
That's not because the developer's like, I'm just gonna be nice. Let's give them
No,
two firewalls. No,
yeah,
the building code said no, you have to build those into the structure. And I'm pretty sure at the time some developer said, but it's gonna cost us so much more because it's more material or whatever. I'm happy that those things are there. And I admit that, yeah, I probably had to pay a couple $1,000s more for my house because I had those firewalls in there, but I'm happy that they're there. And yeah, you're right. Like we don't. So I guess
but
to bring it back, but to bring it back to the insurance company's point of view, it's a matter of then of saying, well, if you're going to insure these new houses, is the insurance company then going to or companies then going to say, well, okay, well, insure, but your rates are going to be higher because you don't have these mitigating
right,
building factors in there. So yes, Mark Cripps, you want to buy a brand new house? Fantastic, congratulations. Your insure your month your property insurance is going to be far higher than your neighbor next door who splurged on the initial down payment and got
right.
all these things added in.
Yep.
And I guess that's what it comes down to. It's like, but that just seems kind of ad hoc and it's a messy way of
Well,
doing this
but Joel, I
change.
think you've nailed it actually. I mean, when you think about it, okay, so you say, maybe you paid a little bit more, right? But now your insurer is going to price your policy at a lot less. So
Right.
over time, you're going to recoup that investment and more. Like it, but really, should it be incumbent on the buyer? Like, I feel like this should be kind of like developers should, like they could use a boost to their image, right? They're not the most popular people,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But imagine if they became climate leaders. Imagine if they became an industry that focused on climate prevention, on providing homes for people that withstand the new normal of climate change, of severe weather, of flooding. I mean, I think to me that's a massive win for them and a way for them to like, they pride themselves on building homes for people, right? Like
Right.
building homes, right? That's their big thing. Well, build them better, build them better so that, and then, then those people will get better insurance rates. It'll be, they'll feel better peace of mind, but more importantly, their most valuable asset is protected from what's going on right now. And the next storm's coming, and I'm not like don't want to be Eeyore with the rain cloud over my head, but I mean they're the next
Well,
storm's coming.
in all honesty, Mark, some days I think you're the of all the industries in this country, the insurance industry is the one that kind of has been ringing the bell for a number of
Yep,
years now, saying this stuff's real, folks. And
yep,
that's what I get is that, you know, for decades we heard climate change, it's man-made, it's not
yeah,
real, this kind of wishy-washy. But for decades, you guys have been saying, we've done the math. We've done the math, and the math does not look good, folks. We're concerned with this.
hmm
And I'm flabbergasted that when the insurance companies don't start saying we've actually done the math, like we're not just pie in the sky wishy-washy, let's go hug a tree. We've done the
we
math,
definitely
we've done the
when we go to
data.
government, we tell them that, Joel.
Well, I'm hoping that folks in government will listen to this podcast on their way into to Queens Park or to Parliament Hill and take note because climate change is here, it's real, and I think, yeah, it's going to cost us all one way or another. And as you said, we all it's kind of we all have to pitch in
Yep,
to fix it.
it's a
So
whole of society approach. Absolutely,
absolutely.
everybody needs to be part of it.
On that note, I'm going to end off this episode. But thank you very much, Mark, for coming on, enlightening us a bit on what the insurance bureau is doing on this important file for all of us. And I guess we'll keep in touch because climate change isn't going away anytime soon.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate, it's nice to have an opportunity to speak about the insurance perspective, and to, to give some solid tips to homeowners to just get them thinking about, ways to protect their most valuable asset, and what they can do to kind of like, help general society at,
Sounds good. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'll see everyone next or the next Thursday on the podcast. Bye bye.